Can you hear me?
Yep, I think so.
So we're just gonna do it straight off the laptop.
Let's see. Talk again?
Yeah,
okay.
we're gonna do it straight off the laptop.
Should we do it lower? Should we do these chairs? Should we set it up, move it up or anything?
Well, you guys are live, so
Are we live?
yeah. You're live. Go for it.
All right. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Sorry about the audio, but here's what happens when things are live. And I think I've learned this in life. Look, I'm not too new to know that you can just roll through anything.
Yes, let's roll.
And right? And like deal with challenges and adversity with just good intentions and positivity. So thank you so much, Ken, and for everyone who's watching the CultureCast live. Appreciate your patience. And I'm just gonna start over again because our audio was off, just technical difficulties. Greetings, everyone. Happy CultureCast Day, happy Black History Month, and happy birthday plus one day, Frederick Douglass. I am sitting here with a dear friend, an icon, Kenneth B. Morris Jr. I'm gonna call you Ken. And Kenneth B. Morris Jr. is the co-founder and president of the Frederick Douglass Family Foundation. And we are here, and what I will underscore or understate, for an epic week. Not only is it celebrating Frederick Douglass's birthday, but I'm gonna just let you talk about why it is epic. And actually, one more thing I do want to say, and it might be the first time live. Kenneth is also the leader of an organization called The Descendants. So I'm gonna tease it out, and I'm gonna toss it to you and just talk about you and like this week.
Thank you, Marisa. Well, before we jump into the week, I think it's really important that we talk about my ancestors. I'm the great-grandson of Frederick Douglass, and I'm also the great-grandson of Booker T. Washington, and co-founder, as you said, president of our family organization, Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, and we're an abolitionist and anti-racist organization with a mission to build strong children and to end systems of exploitation and oppression. And that part of the mission to build strong children comes from Frederick Douglass's famous quote, which is one of my favorite. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I'll add to that broken women as well. And you mentioned we're a day removed from Frederick Douglass's birthday. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why it is we celebrate his birthday on the 14th.
I love that.
Because he didn't know when he was born. He was born into slavery with the name Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. And he had only seen his mother a handful of times his whole life. He had been separated from her when he was a little boy, as actually an infant. And she worked on a plantation that was 12 miles away. So in order for her to see her son, she would have to work in the fields, picking cotton from sunup to sundown, walk 12 miles in the middle of the night, and then spend just a few precious moments with him until he would fall asleep. And then she would have to walk 12 miles back so she could be back on the plantation by the time the sun came up, because if she wasn't, she most likely was going to face punishment. And so the few times that she saw him, she used to call him her little Valentine.
Oh.
And so when he decided he was going to celebrate his birthday, he chose February 14th. And so that's why we celebrate his birthday on the 14th. And then another, I think, interesting point around all of that is the reason that we celebrate Black History Month in February. At our organization, I spent a lot of time in schools just having conversations and dialogues with students all across the country, in every corner of the country. And whenever I ask the question, why do we celebrate Black History Month in February, they most commonly respond by saying, because it's the shortest month of the year.
Right.
And then they say that's what they gave us. And so I always like to gently correct them and say, no, it's a month that we actually took. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who in 1926 wanted to have Black history into the curriculum, to the history curriculum. He chose the second week of February to start something called Negro History Week. And he chose that week because it was President Lincoln's birthday on the 12th and Frederick Douglass's birthday on the 14th. And then that evolved into what we now call Black History Month or African American
Yeah.
History Month. And so that's why we celebrate it in February.
I love that you explained that. I think a lot of people, when you share that information, they don't realize that. And there's a significance around it. And so I also want to jump into, how the heck are you a descendant of both Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington? So what's that all about?
Yeah, well, that's a great
Yeah.
question. And, you know, when I meet people for the first time, that's typically the question I get. Well, actually, I get two questions.
Yeah.
So the first question is, you're related to Frederick Douglass and to Booker T. Washington. Well, what do you do?
Oh,
So
okay.
they want to know, you must be doing something great. And if you're not, you better be.
Oh, wow.
So there's that kind of expectation or weight placed upon my shoulders to do great things, to be iconic like my ancestors, which is a very difficult task. And we could perhaps talk about that
I'd love to talk
a
more
little
about
bit
that.
later.
Yeah.
But as far as how I'm related to both of them, it happened on my mother's side of the family. So you ready for this?
I'm so ready for
Okay.
this. And by the way, I love your mom.
Yes,
She's
got a chance to
amazing.
meet her.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's here with us this week. So her mother, Nettie Hancock Washington, is Booker T. Washington's granddaughter, and her father, Frederick Douglass III, is Frederick Douglass's great-grandson. And so her parents,
Oh my goodness.
my grandparents, met in 1941 at Tuskegee Institute, which is a school that Booker T. Washington founded in
Yeah.
1881.
Yeah.
By the way, he was only 25 years old when he started that school. And so this is a great story, and my mother tells it a lot better than I do. But so the story goes, my grandmother had been born in the hospital on campus. She was living in California at the time, but she was home for summer vacation in Tuskegee, Alabama. My grandfather, who was a surgeon, he had been commissioned down to Tuskegee by the Veterans Administration during World War II. And he had decided this evening that he was going to eat in a student cafeteria, which is a place he had never eaten in before. And so he's strolling to get something to eat. My grandmother was meeting friends. And so she was always, really just hectic and active. And so she's rushing across campus, and they literally bumped into each other. Didn't know that the other descended from a historic family. They fell in love at first sight.
Oh my goodness.
And wound up getting married just 3 months later. And I always like to tell students when I talk to them, and I always said this to my two daughters, do not get married to somebody having only known them for 3 months. But that's exactly what happened.
Well,
They got married. And then when my mother was born, Nettie Washington Douglass, she united the bloodlines of the families. She was an only child, so I have the honor and privilege and blessing to be the first male to carry the dual lineage.
Oh my gosh. I so love that you shared that story about how your mother became the first to unite the families, and then now you're carrying on the dual lineage. Just lesson for everybody, because I know, I talk to a lot of people. I think for those who do know me, I'm a people person. And by the way, I love love, right? I love it when people meet each other, whether it's for a romantic and hopefully family relationship someday, or, great relationships where you can do work together. But that is, I think, one of the most unique meet cute stories that I've ever heard.
Yeah.
So again, I'm a big believer in, look, I think the universe sometimes puts a little nudge your way.
Mhm.
And when you think about that, like your great grandfather wasn't thinking to go eat at this place, and I'm just going to change direction and go do that. Right. And then your great grandmother, like, okay, let's just go hang out, and then run into him.
Yeah.
So I just think like the universe sometimes puts messages out there,
Mhm.
and I think it was truly meant to be
Yes.
that they were meeting. So I love that meet cute story. It's amazing.
Yeah, we absolutely believe that it was meant to be. And it would be many, many years later that we would start to, really think about putting together a family organization. My mother has, since she was a little girl, carried that torch in moving the legacies forward. I remember the first photograph that I ever saw of her. She wasn't even 2 years old.
Oh, wow.
And she was breaking ground for the Booker T. Washington National Historic Site in Virginia. And then from there, she was always out there doing these first Negro History Week events. And as she got older and then started to have children, I'm the oldest of three. I have a
Okay.
younger brother and sister. That became her, as she would say, job of choice.
Yeah.
And then once we started to get older, she started to go back into schools, and that's where she loved to be, was always in front of young people and students, just talking about this incredible history.
I think it's amazing too. I think about your lineage and your mom's lineage, and Frederick Douglass, who actually taught himself to read, right?
Yes,
And in doing so, I mean, it's an amazing story just to actually walk away, hop on a train, and escape,
Yes.
because he was just so well educated and so well read, all self-taught, right?
All
Yeah.
self-taught. Well, we know from our U.S. history that it was illegal to teach an enslaved person to
Yes.
read and write. And Frederick, in his first autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, which was first published in 1845, he talks about a moment that he describes as divine providence in his favor.
Yeah.
And this is really at the foundation of all of the work that we do at our organization. And the story that he wrote about was had been born on the eastern shore of Maryland,
Mhm.
again with the name Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. He would change his name to Douglas after escaping to make it harder for his enslaver to track him down. But at the age of about 8 or 9, and I have to use an age range because
yeah.
again, he didn't know
That's
his
right.
birthday. So he writes, I was chosen by divine providence to go to Baltimore to be the house servant for his master's family. And he said, I was the first, last, and only choice, because his enslaver had more than 1,000 enslaved Africans across all of the various
Yeah.
farms that he owned. So there were lots of children,
Yeah.
but he was chosen. He goes to Baltimore. And the importance of this move was he was going to be in the big city. He would be around free Black children. He would be around poor white children.
Yeah.
But most importantly, when he gets there, his slave mistress, Sophia Auld, had never had a slave before.
Yeah.
Didn't know that it was illegal to teach him to read and write. And just out of the kindness of her Christian heart,
Oh my goodness.
she was already teaching her young son, Tommy, how to read and write. And there's Frederick Bailey, just wide-eyed and ready to learn. And here's a really important part that isn't necessarily communicated when this story is told.
Yeah.
And this is a nuanced point, that he asked her to teach him. And so
He did.
this was, in my mind, his first instance of self-liberation.
Wow.
And so she begins to teach him his ABCs. The lessons continue for a little while. And then his enslaver finds out about him, Hugh Auld, and you know what comes next.
Yeah.
He gets angry, he gets mad, and he looks at his wife and he looks at young Frederick, and he said, you cannot teach a slave how to read and write, because if you do, it will unfit him to be a slave. And so Frederick heard that message loud and
Right.
clear, and he looked at his enslaver and he thought, if you don't want me to have this, I'm going to do everything in my power to gain it. And he understood right then and there that knowledge is power, which is a message we hear
Yes.
today, and that education equals freedom.
Yes.
Education equals liberation. Education equals emancipation. And he would teach himself to read and write.
I mean, that's an empowering and inspiring story. I know that in our conversations, what I've taken away from you is, and it actually connects the dots between the two families too, which education is freedom. I love that. Education is liberation. And I think about on the Booker T. Washington side, the fact that he was a young man founding a university that is all about education. And I'm thinking about your mom, kind of going back to it. I know it's kind of, I'm circling around it, but your mom was an activist at 2 years old.
Yeah, I
Right?
guess you
If you
consider
think about
that.
it.
Yes, you think
Yeah,
about it
and
that
an
way.
educator at the same time.
Right.
And so, and then of course, her job of choice was to become a mother and raise an amazing family. And then look at the greatness coming out of your family. And I think it's the two coming together.
Yeah.
I've experienced that, in our conversations and hanging out with you. So that's wild.
Booker, yeah. Well, the education piece is really the most important part of it,
Yeah.
which continues today. It's relevant today. And both of my ancestors understood from a very young age that education equaled freedom. And for Booker T, and his story is incredible just as well. Frederick Douglass, he becomes the leading voice of the abolitionist movement. and he's working with President Lincoln during the Civil War to push Lincoln to the point
Yes.
where he would sign the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. And that proclamation freed those that were enslaved in the states that were in rebellion to the Union.
Yeah.
It didn't free everybody that was enslaved in the border states. For those states that stayed with the Union, did not free those people. But Booker T was in Virginia. He was freed, and he wanted to go to school so badly. He's about 9 years old,
Yeah.
that he worked in the salt and coal mines of West Virginia at night so that he could begin to take his lessons during the day. And he's continuing to get educated. And then one night he's in these mines and he hears these two older gentlemen talking about this place called Hampton Institute in Virginia, where he could get an education, or what they would call
Yeah.
an industrial education. Those people that were enslaved, teaching them a trade, giving them tools so that they can have a stake in
Yeah.
the nation's growing economy. Now, to Booker T, he had no idea what that type of education meant, but to him, Hampton sounded like heaven. And so
Oh, wow.
he
Yeah.
literally thought it was heaven. And so with the help of community members and some money that he had saved, he made a 500-mile walk to go to school. And that walk took a long time. He ran out of money on several occasions. He had to take odd jobs along the way. He slept outside. He slept under bridges. And a message to young people when they hear that story is that there was no challenge too great,
Right.
no obstacle that was insurmountable for him to overcome to get an education. And so he finally gets to Hampton, and he goes straight to the headmistress of the school. He said, I want to go to school here. She looks at him. His clothes are torn. He's disheveled. He's dirty. He probably didn't smell so great. And she said, young man, you're not worthy to go to school here. But he wasn't going to take no for an answer. And she tried to shoo him away. He would come back the next day. She shoos him away again. And he keeps coming back and coming back. And then finally she said, I can see you're not going to take no for an answer.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you an opportunity to prove yourself. There's a dirty classroom down the
no.
hallway. Go clean that. And he had learned the value of hard work. And he was now going to put those skills to test that he'd learned in working in the coal mines. And so he cleaned, and she went in there to do what they used to do back in the day, the white glove test.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, looking for the
Let me just double check
dust
all the
or
cracks.
dirt.
Yeah.
Yeah. She couldn't find one speck of dust. That room was pristine. And she said, okay, you've proven yourself. And not only that, we're going to give you the job as a janitor so you can work your way through school. And so he started Hampton at the age of 16 years old.
Oh my goodness. And literally put himself through school.
He
Right?
worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, he put himself through school. He would graduate 3 years later. He would come back to Hampton to teach. And then in 1881, he got word that there was a group of people down in Tuskegee that had some money to start a school down there that would be modeled after Hampton's industrial education. And they got word back that this guy, Booker T at Hampton, is the man for the job. And he rushes down to Tuskegee and gets to work starting and founding Tuskegee Institute.
Oh my goodness. There's so many lessons learned here too. Just hearing that story, and there's correlations with Frederick Douglass as well. I think about for young people, especially children, right? When they're younger and getting into adolescence, there is value in that curiosity and openness, and hearing about Hampton University or Institute and thinking it was heaven. And then even Frederick hearing about, well, if I'm educated, then I'm unfit to be a slave, to just carry on to that, right? And like grab onto that.
Yeah.
And then I also think about the value of hard work. I mean, literally the value of hard work. That I think, again, it's the energy and the reps and the practice that you put out there. I think just generally, because people think, oh, things happen for me, like things are going to fall out of the air, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was thinking about like, okay, we had audio issues. Okay, whatever.
Right. Yeah, you got to just keep rolling.
You just keep rolling.
Yeah.
I mean, a 500-mile walk and sleeping wherever, not eating or eating whatever.
Right.
And getting to that point where then you have to continue to prove yourself and keep showing up.
Well,
That is
speaking
so
of the
good.
value of hard
Yeah.
work, so and Frederick Douglass was a quote machine.
Yeah.
But another quote that I love, he was enslaved for 20 years, first 20 years of his life. And he later wrote, he said, I prayed for 20 years, but my prayers weren't answered until I prayed with my legs. And what he meant by that, he was
Yeah.
praying for deliverance, praying to God for deliverance from his bondage and from his chains. And when he made the decision to finally run away
Yeah.
with his legs, his prayers were answered. So that goes to what you're talking about,
Yes.
the value of hard work. You can't just want a job, but then
Yes.
not get off the couch and go find a
Right.
job. So
Right. And I know in my career experience and in coaching younger people who, there's this immediacy of like, well, I'm new in my job, but I want to get promoted and I want to move up. And a lot of it is, be excellent
mhm,
and even more so what you do today and learn everything that you can
yeah.
because I think the next thing follows when that happens. So, and there's also a value, and I've been having conversations with all the peeps we've been hanging out with this week, that perseverance is also very important. And
Yeah.
pursuing, like having that uh, perseverance and drive
Mhm.
to continue to ask for things when maybe it's not your turn yet. I think it's a combination of both.
It
Yeah.
has to be a combination of both. And all of our ancestors and mine, have notoriety, of which of course I'm very proud of. And as we've been talking about over the
Yeah.
past couple of days that we've been together with our group, all of us descend from somebody that made a difference, somebody that may have given up their lives for the freedoms that we do have, given up their lives just so that some of us can sit in a classroom
Yes.
and get an education. And when we're in schools talking to young people, we want them to understand that they have greatness flowing through their
Yeah.
veins as well, and that we all stand on the shoulders of those that came before us. And that has been that common theme
Yes.
that we've been talking about this week, as well as this idea that by birthright, all of us have an obligation to carry our history forward, because there's still, as we know, a lot of work still to be done. We're living in a country that is as divided as it's been in a long time.
Yeah.
And the rhetoric that's out there that's racist, sexist, xenophobic, and just this idea of trying to divide and conquer and split us apart as a country, as a society. And I believe, because we've talked about this a
Yeah.
lot, that the spirit of all of our ancestors and the spirit of Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington and Anna Murray Douglass, my great 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 grandmother, Olivia Davidson, my great great grandmother, and all of the women that are and were in my life, that spirit lives in all of us. And as we move forward and talk about the things that we'll work on with the Descendants
Yes.
Project, the things that we work on, the projects and initiatives, the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, I truly believe that that spirit can be a healing balm on our nation's wounds. And this is kind of this idea, this bigger picture vision that we move forward with.
I love it. Yeah. And I mean, especially today, 2024, yeah, the nation is wounded. There was divisiveness, polarization.
Mhm.
And I think it's okay to have different opinions, but it's not okay to not be kind,
Yes,
right, to
right.
each other. And I think that's the difference. Like people just don't have the patience to hold space for each other,
Mhm.
even if there's a difference of opinion. And I think that's the beauty of, and we'll jump into how epic and unreal, but historic, like this week has been.
Yeah,
And instead
yeah.
of me saying it, I would rather you, because we have been following your lead, my friend, and we have been like of service to this vision. So let's talk about the Descendants Project and what the heck happened this week.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, as I started, because of my unique connection to history, I always like to start with the history.
Yeah.
So to get to where we were this week and where we're going forward, the start of that history really is this idea that when I was a little boy, I was not really that connected to my history.
Yeah.
The few times that I told people of my relationship when I was younger, nobody ever believed me. And I never thought that it was a point worth arguing. And but I did, at about 5 or 6 years old, started to notice that my ancestors were on statues and postage
there's that,
stamps.
you
And,
know. Yeah.
schools were named for them, bridges and libraries. And I would ask my friends and classmates, "Are your grandparents on statues?" And of course, they would say no. And I really, okay, I'm going to share this.
Yeah. Share it.
So I talked about the happy love story
Yeah.
of my grandparents coming together and getting married, having only known each other for 3 months. But there's also a tragic side to the story, and that is my grandfather, the surgeon, the namesake of Frederick Douglass. People expected him to be an iconic leader like his great grandfather.
Yeah.
And they placed this weight of expectation on his shoulders, which he always walked around with. But there's only one Frederick Douglass. And when my grandmother was 3 months pregnant with my mom, that weight became too much for him to carry, and he took his own life.
Oh no.
And so my mother was born without a father and raised without a father. And then when I came along with this dual lineage, my parents, grandparents, great grandparents were going to go, really in the opposite direction and kind of place this, what I call a formidable shield around us to protect us from these legacies. And so I really was decisively disengaged from my ancestry until divine providence called in my life. And that was much later in life. I had started an advertising and marketing company, which was doing really well. I was happy to be a father and a husband. I'll celebrate 40 years of marriage in May, this coming May. So I was good with that. Go to church on Sunday and don't talk to me about this Douglass and Washington stuff. But in 2005, I read a National Geographic magazine, and the cover story was entitled 21st Century Slaves.
Yeah.
And it was an article about human trafficking existing all over the world, including here in the United States. And that article just floored me. Like, it hit me squarely between the eyes. And I'd heard about trafficking in far off places,
Sure,
but didn't really think about the impact that it had in this country, and that the idea was that it is modern day slavery. And so I wanted to learn more about it. And I just started reading articles and, devouring as much information as I could. And there was one night that changed the whole trajectory of my life. And that was, I was sitting in my living room and I was reading an article about a 12-year-old girl who was forced to be a sex slave in the brothels of Southeast Asia. And my older daughter, Jenna, was 12, so same age. And my younger daughter, Nicole, was 9. And I could hear them down the hallway getting ready for bed. And they were laughing and playing and about to get tucked safely into bed. And I'm reading this story about this 12-year-old girl, and my mind just starts racing. And I can't wrap my brain around what I'm reading and what I'm hearing. And I remember thinking to myself, that's what young girls should be doing, and boys should be getting tucked safely into bed and not being forced into bed to service some sick individual. And when I walked in to say goodnight to my daughters, I had this moment where I couldn't even look them in the eyes. And I couldn't look them in the eyes and walk away and not do something about this. And it was immediately that I understood that I had this platform that my ancestors had built through struggle and through sacrifice. And perhaps we could leverage the historical significance of my ancestry to do something about this. So it's kind of this aha moment. Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist on one side, Booker T. Washington, the great educator on the other side, abolition through education. How can we unfit communities to allow slavery to exist and thrive? Remember that story about young Frederick Bailey? Education will unfit him to be a slave. So my mom and I started the Frederick Douglass Family Foundation initiatives in 2007, and we were off and running. And so that's that foundational piece of how we started. And our primary work has been human trafficking prevention education in K through 12 schools. We have the most comprehensive human trafficking prevention education program that exists. So
amazing.
I'm going to stop with that because we can transition into the Descendants Project, but that's really where all of this started.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's when I first met you and I was learning about this for the first time, and how, and I think a theme that I'm beginning to understand and beginning to learn, having spent time with other descendants, is the legacy, right? And the weight. And I guess I didn't realize the story about your grandfather. Anyway, I didn't realize that story, but I think about the weight of legacy and how I've heard that theme of families wanting to shield that with, the young ones growing up. And then at some point, as an adult, I think it's a calling, right? That happens. And then it's this realization like, oh, my life also includes, what my what my ancestors did and how do I bring that to life in modern day, which you did absolutely. That's what clicked for you. And now here you are stepping into it. Well, back then, fully
Right.
stepping into it now, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think because I found the mission on my own,
Yeah.
it's more meaningful
Yeah,
than it would have been had it been forced on me.
I agree. So let's talk about your mission and the next evolution of this. So I think it's amazing that it's the most comprehensive education for K through 12 students to
Mhm.
learn about how they can how communities can be unfit
Hmm.
for creating environments where that happens. Where
Yeah.
where human trafficking, sex trafficking happens at that age, and now it's evolved to, all right, how do you help others kind of find their calling and
Hmm.
other descendants like you?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the human trafficking education is all age appropriate, and people, get shocked to think that you have to educate somebody that is as young as 5 and 6 years old, but we do, unfortunately. And
Yeah.
so the idea behind the Descendants Project really came early on when we started our organization. And we thought, how can we connect with other descendants and get back to this idea of leveraging the historic significance of our ancestry and this platform that has been afforded to us to work collectively on issues that we're most concerned about. And as we started to put ourselves out there, I started to meet various descendants and have conversations about the great work they're doing to help preserve and teach about their ancestors' legacy. But then I also started to find that there was a lot of commonality in our story,
Yeah.
getting back to the pressure and the weight and just trying to step into our own shoes and out of the shadows, these very vast shadows of our ancestors. And so we started talking about something called the Descendants Project, that we could pull people together and start to collectively work on issues. But at the time, it never really came to fruition. We didn't have the resources
Yeah.
to be able to support it. We were trying to get our organization going, which was very difficult to find funding initially because not many people get passionate or excited about funding prevention,
Yeah.
preventing the exploitation and brutality before it happens, the victimization before it happens. So it kind of died. And then I met our mutual
Yeah.
friend, Joshua Jordison. And this was in 2018. He just cold called me out of the
Right.
blue like he does.
Yeah. That's what he does.
And we had lunch, and he said, I've had this idea ruminating in my mind for a while about bringing together descendants. And I said, I've had the same idea. So we started talking about how we could work together to make it happen. And we started planning, and then COVID hit and derailed everything like it did for everybody. And maybe about 6 months ago, Josh said to me, hey, let's do this and make this happen. And I had met you when you
Yeah.
were still at Chipotle, and we had had conversations and started
Yes.
to develop a friendship. And he said, let's pull Marisa in on this, and let's make this happen for February. And I thought he was talking about February 2025 because I'm used to
Right.
planning at least
Oh,
a year in
yeah.
advance. But he said, no, February 2024. And so you guys got to work, and behind the scenes, I don't even know, maybe you want to talk about all
Yeah.
of that, but it was just amazing that the team that
Yeah.
we developed and all of the passionate people who have been working as
Yes.
volunteers, working pro bono, said, yes, let's make this happen over 2 days in Washington, D.C. And here we are.
Yeah, it was amazing. And what I would say to that is, yes, Joshua, and I think that he was meant to meet you because that was also a passion of him. And at some point, we'll have him on and we'll have him tell his story. But I think about the conversations that we've been having, and I know that when you founded the Family Foundation or the initiatives, that this was an idea. And it just, to your point, was really difficult because I remember I met you right as we were going into COVID, and then COVID happened, et cetera. And then, actually it was beginning of last year where it's kind of like, we should fire up and do this.
Right.
Yeah, it was just one of those.
Yeah.
Everyone's now gathering and coming together. Let's just pick this right back up. Right. And to
Mhm.
your point, I don't know. I mean, it just happened so quickly once the idea came together and we were pulling the right people and resources. And I think when you have, you said this about your own choosing and your own calling, if it's something that you're passionate about, it's going to freaking happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, the universe pulls it together. and
Yeah,
makes
and
it
it's like
happen.
articulate that vision. What are we doing? How are we going to do this? And to your point, all the people who've been involved over the last couple of days who were either behind the scenes helping to pull this together, and there's a few kind of sitting here in the room with
Mhm.
us, and other organizations and leaders as well who were committed to this idea. And it's just an idea,
Right.
right, that came together. I think it just says a lot when you just put that statement out there and you put the right people together
hmm
to make it happen. And, for those of you who I know were doing your research, when you're like, all right, well, what's Kenneth B. Morris doing with Marisa on CultureCast? The headlines were astounding 2 days ago
hmm
because, and I'll say it, but I think about in the first time in history for the United States of America, here we're sitting in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, for the first time ever. The descendants of iconic Black civil rights leaders are coming together for the first time and meeting each other.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy.
It was an historic event for sure,
Yeah.
but just the beginning. And, bringing everybody together, we just wanted to make sure, we treated all of the descendants with the respect and dignity that they deserve. So we did a number of events. We had the tour at the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture yesterday.
That was amazing.
We've had some amazing dinners. We were last night with the RFK Center, and they hosted us with their board members. Their board meeting starts today, actually, and we just had a number of activities. We were at the Lincoln Memorial.
Yeah.
Please remind me if I'm forgetting any of the
Well,
other
the
things.
U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, U.S. Capitol, yeah.
And then I think a highlight of the visit
Oh,
at
yeah.
the White House
hmm
was.
How can I forget that
Yeah,
one?
hello.
Yeah, that's where we kicked it off.
I know. President Kamala Harris just welcoming the group in.
Yeah.
And I love this story that she told about, again, the responsibility and the accountability that we have
Mhm.
from, everything that you've been talking about carrying and following through from our ancestors and passing the baton.
Yeah.
So she talked about that. And that to me, I kind of just really stuck with me that it's not just on one person
hmm
and that it's about us being there
Yeah.
to kind of pick it up and work with
And
each other
run
hand in
run
off,
forward
run with
with
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love how you already anointed her president.
Oh my goodness. Vice President Kamala Harris. Oh my gosh, that probably was a Freudian slip.
Yeah,
But
right.
okay, right? You all know what I think. Anyway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But yeah, she truly spoke from the heart, and that was so nice of her, to be a part of this historic event. And as I said, it's just the beginning. What I had hoped to accomplish over the couple of days was to see how we all vibe together.
Yes.
And we just started to have conversations about what this looks like moving forward. So the next step will be to come together again where we actually have planning sessions
Yes.
and think about what this looks like as far as the entity moving forward. But I
Totally.
want to make sure that all of the descendants, I don't want to create any kind of hierarchy in this organization.
Sure.
All of the descendants' voices will carry the same weight. But I think the most important thing about what we'll be doing is the collective voice that we'll be bringing together.
I agree.
And Josh had said this to me, and I agree that the descendants will be able to speak with a moral authority that will be very hard to impugn about those issues that we are concerned about. And so I'm just so excited about what this can become. I know there have been, as we were talking with the descendants over the past couple of days, they had indicated to me that there had been other opportunities or efforts to try and make this happen. And they all were just so excited that we actually did this, that we brought everybody together.
Yeah, I think it's pretty amazing. And I love the approach. I think it's the timing. I think it's the energy. And I agree with you. There are a lot of expectations from people on the outside who quite frankly couldn't make it. But,
Right.
they're like, what are you going to do? And what's really going to happen? And a lot of it is, and I say this all the time, part of it is you've got to lean into the energy. right? And I
mhm.
think the energy that I felt and that I experienced hanging out with all of the descendants, all of the guests who care about this so much as well. We had over 100 people
Yeah.
in our group, right?
Yeah.
And then there was over 100 people at the White House, right? Like
Right.
who that joined. Um, and I just think about my jam is
Mm.
how do you bring this group together and co-create
Mm-hmm.
this vision that you're all about? And then how do we fall in behind and
Mm.
provide that level of support to really accomplish this shared vision? And I think you can't define that until you come together and feel that. And I
Right.
think that's what this week was all about. And I think about, it was very touching for me and a poignant and emotional moment for me. I was fortunate to just be present and hang out with Reverend Parker Wheeler.
Yeah.
Yeah, who is the cousin
Yeah.
of Emmett Till. And here we were, and it was just so happened, my husband Michael was hanging out with him, and I know his wife had to stay back she's like, you go to the Smithsonian, and so I ran into them during the tour, and I got to chat with him more specifically, and then we happened to be at that part of the exhibit, which was the memorial for Emmett Till, and to experience that firsthand. There's
Yeah.
inside that part of the museum is the original casket for Emmett Till. And there's also stories that are being told, including with his voice. So there's
Mhm.
recordings from the family. And then there was montages and videos of the neighborhood, the house,
Yes.
where he was also there
Mhm.
and telling that
As a
story
16-year-old
as a
boy.
16-year-old boy. And we're looking at this video and it would loop and we'd come to the house where they all were sleeping. And he said, my cousin was in this side of the house.
Mhm.
I was across the hall on this side. And he's like, it could have been any one of us.
Mhm.
So to bring this forward, I think for him to be able to tell this story in detail firsthand, and also what I've shared with people, and I said this to him last night and his wife, I just hanging out with him, I just felt so calm and peaceful. And
Mhm.
I think I might have shared this with you too. He was giving me dad vibes. Like he
Yeah.
reminds me
Yeah.
of, what I know about my dad, joy and calm and peace, even in telling these stories. And I don't know if that makes sense to you,
It
but
makes
to
a lot of
just,
sense. Yeah.
to carry in that way and be so factual about what happened in his experience through storytelling was powerful for me. It was amazing.
He is such a beautiful spirit, and man, he and his wife, and he's in his 80s now. And when I think about my connection to history,
Yeah.
and I talk about being the great 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 grandson, and it sounds like I'm far removed, and I always talk to young people and I want them to understand how close we are to this history. And I have a great grandmother that knew Frederick Douglass and an aunt that was Booker T. Washington's daughter, and I knew them well. And I always say I stand one person away from each man. But when you think about Pastor Wheeler Parker, he's right there at that history. He was there that night, as you
Yeah.
said, and when those racists broke in to that house and then took away Emmett Till and then lynched him, he was right there. And all of these years later, to have to relive that
Yeah.
trauma, that experience. But what he's doing is he's telling the stories and helping people to understand,
Yeah.
what happened. And I think that's really what the descendants can do. It's a very powerful connection to history. We had descendants of Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Thomas Jefferson, and Sally Hemings. We had descendants of Harry Belafonte, and Jesse Jackson, and many more.
Yeah. Ida B. Wells.
Ida B. Wells, yeah.
It's incredible. And actually, it was phenomenal. And if our friends at RFK Center for Human Rights are participating in this webcast, thank you for your graciousness last night. That was amazing too.
Mhm.
Spending time with Carrie Kennedy
Right.
and her board, and every board member that I had the chance to have a conversation with we're just astounded by
Mhm.
this vision that will unfold
Yes.
coming from the Descendants Project.
Well, I want to thank you on behalf
Oh.
of my family, the family of Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington. And we never forget the women, Anna Murray Douglas and Olivia Davidson as well, for everything that you did, and your team, your colleagues, and everybody that's been behind the scenes that have contributed their passion, their talents, their creativity to make this happen. And that really has been the missing piece of organizing this together. And this is why I'm really confident moving forward, because you all are so talented at what you do, that this will happen. It will continue to snowball, and we will move forward in a way that we can impact this nation and guide this nation, I believe, toward this idea of reconciliation and healing. But also, before we get there, we have to have a reckoning of our past and a truth telling about the true history in this country of the genocide of Native American peoples, the oppression and enslavement over 400 years of people of African descent. And when we are coming with that historical connection and narrative, we can begin to have those conversations in spite of the book bans that are happening, in spite of
Sure.
the erasure of this history and the whitewashing and sanitizing, and as Dr. Cornell West says, the deodorizing
Sure.
of this history. And so there's so much that we'll be able to do together. So thank you, thank your team, and for everything that you've done to get us to this point.
Well, I would say it's a privilege to be a part of this. And I know my team and my colleagues also feel the same way. And I know the leaders from the various organizations who actually flew here
Mhm.
to come and participate also feel the same way. It is, it's part of, if that's your purpose and calling, of course, this is something that I know I want to personally pour my heart into,
Mhm.
to be a part of. And, like-minded people hang out together, right? And I
Right.
think about when you call the right friends and right people, and we've met so many people together, right?
Yeah,
As this was coming together, it's naturally, right?
Mhm.
Naturally going to happen. And I think it's this lesson that you're talking about, as I hear you talk about having a reckoning with our past. And I think, for human beings, and I feel like having been in the people space and corporate and human resources and coaching and mentoring a lot of people coming up in their careers, for example,
Mhm.
and also creating pathways to opportunity for folks who maybe didn't think that they can go as far as they can,
Right.
without that encouragement. I think a lot of it is just really coming complete with who you are and where you came from.
Mhm.
I think that's so important.
Mhm.
We're talking about histories of families, and I think as humans, in order to move on and actually achieve and accomplish in life, I think it is about, like, who are you?
Right.
And, honor that.
Yeah.
Like, understand that, who you are and where you came from. And when I say that, for me personally, it's like really truly understanding the sacrifice that my parents made when they
Mhm.
immigrated here. They decided to have a family, all of that. But then to not ever hide that, like really be proud of that, as painful as it may seem,
Mhm.
or as proudful as it may seem.
Yeah.
I mean, honor all of that.
Yeah.
And by doing so, you can move on, and actually go and pursue and create a life that you're passionate about.
Mhm.
And so I'm hearing, it's just reminding me of your stories and everything that you're saying, but I'm saying to all of you, relevance for you, although all of this is relevant, it's like what can inspire people to just do greatness in the world is really come complete with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also knowing where we come from. We
Yes.
have to know where we come from in order to know where we're headed. And everybody that's watching and listening to this conversation, and I started by saying, we have greatness
Yes.
flowing through our veins. All of us do. And history lives in each of us. But how do we carry that history forward? What will our great, great, great grandchildren say about us 150 years from now in this moment in time in which we find ourselves? Were we on the right side of history or on the wrong side of history? Fortunately, my ancestors and all of the ancestors of the descendants that were with us this week were on the right side of history. And so we've got a lot of work to do. The baton has been passed.
That's right.
Freedom's torch has been passed to us, and we've got to get running with it and make sure that we make this world a better place for our descendants.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, and I nerded out with you just on a conversation leading up to this, and many conversations we've had leading up to this week. But, let's honor the birthday of Frederick Douglass,
Yeah.
which is +1. We're today on the 15th. And, and I had a random question. Did Frederick Douglass know that not George Washington, President Lincoln's birthday was on the 12th? Did he know that? Or is
Yeah,
that
he
coincidental?
would have.
Okay.
I've never thought about
Yeah.
that, but President Lincoln knew that he was born on the 12th. So Frederick Douglass, I'm sure, must have known that his birthday
Okay.
was
So
on the
that's
12th.
wild that his little mom's little Valentine also chose a date 2 days after President Lincoln.
But I will say
Yeah.
that Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington were friends. And the last known letter that Frederick Douglass wrote the night before he passed away, dated the night before he passed away, was to Booker T. Washington. Frederick Douglass went down to Tuskegee and gave a commencement address.
Oh my goodness.
And there's a photo. It's the only photo of Frederick Douglass actually speaking, and it's at Tuskegee, and you can see Booker T. Washington on the stage. And little did they know, a little more than 50 years later, their descendants would come together and get married, and they would become relatives. Now, of course, after they passed away, they never knew that they were relatives, but they became relatives.
But that energy was put in there in Tuskegee.
Yep.
Like that energy was there.
Mhm.
And so I know that that's why they were, your
Parents
were supposed to meet.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Oh, I'm nerding out on that. I would love to wrap, and I know we're kind of towards the end, but I think you told this amazing story at the White House, and you shared it again, in all the talks that you've had going to grade schools about that young girl. I want you to tell the story about, how she raised her hand.
And, that story. And then I'll just tell a quick another story that really illustrates the importance of education. Again, when we first got started, I was in Albany, and I was in a barber shop with a group of teenage boys. And I told the story about Frederick Douglass hearing that education will unfit him to be a slave. And this young man looked at me and he said, "If I could just describe what's going on in my mind right now," he said, "it feels like a pitch black hallway with no windows, no doors, no way out." And he said, and I get chills thinking about this. He said, "What you just described to me, you have shown a little bit of light into my mental darkness. And now I have some hope. I know which way to point. I know that I can get out of this mental darkness." So again, these stories can inspire young people to believe that they can be and do anything possible. And then the story that you're talking about, it happened early on. And I love telling the story. This young girl, I was in a classroom, and she was 10 years old, and she raised her hand, and she's trying to get my attention, and I'm in the middle of my thing, and she's got her hand up in the air, and I finally call on her, and she said, "Mr. Morris, I want you to know that she's just proud. She's just laying it on me. She said, "My great 4 greats grandmother," I thought I had a lot of greats. She said she was born into slavery, taught herself to read and write in secret, and then became a successful businesswoman and a philanthropist. And she knew what that word meant. She was proud to share it with me. And so she looked at me, she said, "So do you know what all of this means?" And before I had a chance to respond, she said, "It means I have greatness flowing through my veins, just like you do. And we all have greatness flowing through our veins."
I love that.
And leave it to, the mouths of babes, a 10-year-old girl that really set me on the course to do the work that I'm doing, and to believe that we all have greatness flowing through our veins.
I love that. And I think it's such an inspiring way to end our conversation. I wish we had hours and hours where we can continue to talk about this. But what I will also say is, I think greatness, as we kind of roll from here, and I know there are a lot of people who want to learn how to get involved. How can people get a hold of you? What's the best way?
The best way for our organization, Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, is fdfi.org, which is the acronym for Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, and then thedescendants.com. And we're going to be posting all of, the videos and the pictures that
Yes.
we've been taking this week, and then building out that website and moving forward with this amazing project that we've got going on.
I love it. So stay tuned, everyone. If you want to get a hold of Kenneth or the descendants, you've got the info. And we'll also post it up in the show notes. And I guess I'll leave it with, there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
I think it starts with each one of us to really do the work for ourselves. And I think when all else fails, I always love to share this because it's a wild environment right now, right? There's like
Mhm.
agita amongst people because of the polarization. I'll just say
Mhm.
that, and everyone having different points of views. I always would love to end with, look, when all else fails, don't forget the platinum rule. In school we learn the golden rule.
Mhm.
In grade school it's like, okay, treat people the way you want to be treated. Really, it's treat people the way they want to be treated.
Mm.
Level it up.
Mhm. Yeah, level it up.
And if all else fails, just choose kindness. Choose kindness. So,
Hmm.
with that, I'm just going to thank you. I heart you, and it's a privilege to call you my friend and be
Yes.
your friend and just be involved in your orbit, my
Thank
friend.
you.
Yes.
Thank you, Marisa. I
Oh my
appreciate it.
goodness. Yes. Thank you so much. And we'll see you later, everybody, at our next CultureCast, which actually is in an hour from now.
Yeah,
So
you've got a whole full day
That's right.
of interviews.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
All right.